Hello everyone and welcome to Skeptic Philosophy. My name is Robert. I think there's good reason to think that there will never be an agreement between atheist and theist on subjects like evolution or any other subject. There is a philosophical disagreement on how they're coming to conclusions that is unrectifiable until we understand what the problem is. And the best way to understand it is to try to understand things causally. What's happening is we are at a state in time where whatever is here presently, let's take an object. Let's take a teacup. This teacup is here. It's present. This is a cup that my wife gave me. She filled it up with tea a little while ago. Let us assume that we're in a state Z. We'll call the state Z because now is always the furthest state that we can measure. Now this is Z, and the previous state can be measured as X and Y and backwards and so forth. To understand how the T got here, one approach is to understand that it came through a link of causal events. That before the T was here, that it was somewhere else. And we can break this all the way back down to the point of where the metal came from that formed the cup. But we have to understand these things backwards from the Z position, and then you can make conclusions about how it got to that state following each one of those stages backwards. This is, at some point, you can't go any further. You can start with Z, and let's say you can move all the way to K. And then there's just not enough information that you can't really get any further. That's the end of what you can understand or be accurate about your inference. So this happens when we try to do it the other way and we start with the proposition, let's say A, instead of starting with Z and going backwards. Let's say we start with A and then we're trying to go forward with it. These are two different approaches of causation. And one doesn't have a causal link to the other. When we start with Z, we have the state that is observable, and then we're trying to understand every state in between through a causal link. That this state was here, and then there's this state, and then there was this state, and we understand things by understanding what dispensations of states that it went through. So when we ask questions that are great philosophical questions like, where did we come from? Or how did the universe begin? Or what is the meaning of everything? These types of questions, the two different ways to approach it is you can approach it with, we can start with Z and we can understand everything causally backwards, which is an approach that I would argue is philosophically strong. It is reasonably strong, because we can connect every component of it in the causal chain. But if we start with a proposition that is A and say a thing, whatever we want to name that thing or define that thing to be, and then we try to connect it to the furthest thing that we have been able to go backwards with, let's say we can only get to K, and we understand Z, X, Y, all the way back, and then we can understand a state that is K, and we have good information and evidence to prove that we can get to there, but it's really as far as we can get. It's as far as we can understand the causal chain. And then what we have is the people who are making the declaration of the A state is trying to connect A to the K, which is as far as we've been able to get going backwards. And the problem is you don't have everything in between. You don't have a causal link. And going this direction from A and saying, well, A caused, and we don't know everything in between, but somehow it got to K, and then that led to the Z that we presently understand. The problem is you will never be able to fill in any of the information from A. It is not possible to fill that information in. And I'll give you a primary example. Let's say that this is a theistic position and that they say, how all of these things happened is God created the world. God created reality. All right. So we're going to say A happened. And now at some point, all of that got to K, which is as far back as we can get. And that A state has to exist. The problem is we can't even get to B We can't even define B because we can't understand it going forward from that proposition. So if we say God spoke or God wanted this to be created, once God spoke, what is the next action? How did that interact with metaphysical nothingness or whatever it did to get to matter being created? Well, we don't know that. We can't understand how that function worked. So even if we start at A, we can't get even to B causally, much less to K. We'll never be able to get to K. So it seems to me that the obvious philosophically correct way and the obvious scientific way is we have to start with the state that we have, the present state, and then we have to work backwards. It's just the only way that we can understand things causally. And if we start with prepositions, whatever the thing is that we're observing, and we try to connect A with it, what we do is we lose all of the information in between. So when we had other states in our societies where we said, why are volcanoes erupting? We might say, well, somehow it's A. We don't really know how it's A, but we'll make in propositions that might fill it in between and say, the gods are angry, and this is somehow, though we don't know how, is getting to the volcanoes and they're erupting. But instead, if we come from the side of what we can know, then we can slowly begin to understand one component after another backwards till we can get all the way to understanding how the volcanoes and why the volcanoes are erupting. We can do this in things like tectonic plate shifts and everything else that we might have originally attributed those tectonic plate shifts or earthquakes to gods or to metaphysical beings, but we couldn't get any forward momentum from that. We can't get any understanding from it. But if we start with what we can observe, this area of the earth is moving, let's try to measure how much of the earth is moving when this event happens. And then we get an understanding of how much of the earth is moving. Okay, let's measure more of this. And the deeper we get into it, we can understand more of that activity and what is causing it. And this is with every subject category. We can always look deeper from the Z position. We can always understand more and more and more from the Z position. Even with like epilepsy, we have the observable phenomenon, which is the seizuring thing. And we can go from that and understand it more. Then we can probe the brain. We can try to activate the seizuring activity. All of these different things, we can go from the Z. But if we start with a proposition of the A causal event and we try to move forward, we can't connect the A to anything. We don't have anything to go forward with. So this is why I generally take the position that we can never form an A position first. It's an error. It's a cognitive error. It's a reasoning error. And it doesn't matter. It's not about a God. It doesn't matter what thing you propose or set as A. It's wrong to start from A. You have to start from Z and go backwards. It is true that at some point we can't get any more momentum and there's nothing to connect to. So is it possible that we'll ever get further down that scale? It's possible that we may never reach past a certain point, but that's just the things that we then know. We can always push that a little further, and it takes a lot of technology and a lot of time, but it's possible that we'll never get back to understand the A source from this direction. This is true. But it doesn't mean that we can simply propose the A source and try to connect it, but not have any of the causal chain in between, and have a jump between A and K or L or whatever, however we want to measure this understanding. This is an incorrect approach. It is just fundamentally wrong, and it doesn't give any more understanding to society to go this direction. You will always have the problem that you can't get from A to even understand or propose B. So this is the problem. All understanding of humanity has flourished. It has gotten better only from the Z backwards position. We've never gotten any forward traction from the A position. And again, it doesn't matter what the A position is. But what tends to happen for the A position to work in any sense at a philosophical level, for us to argue the A, is we have to expand the ability of the A position so that it can connect to whatever we then understand of reality. Let's say we can get back from Z all the way to L, and that now we can establish and know L as an established fact. We didn't know what L was going to be, though, at some point. So we won't know what the further down letter is either. So what we have to propose as the A has to be an extraordinarily dynamic thing that the A can line up with anything that we can come up with to understand of where the different letter sets are. So if we don't know what the next step down is going to be, let's say we get down to G, we have no idea what the step G is going to be. We have to make A, if we want it to be able to align, extraordinarily dynamic. It has to be infinitely capable, infinitely power, infinitely adjustable, so that it doesn't matter what that number is, it can plug into it and work with it. So it tends to be the case that when people pose an A, and it doesn't matter what God or what creating capacity it is, they have to imbue that thing with an infinite amount of power and an infinite amount of flexibility so that it can align with the progress, because A, you can't make progress. From Z, all progress is made. It has to be able to align with all the work and the progress that has been made from the Z direction backwards. But the sad part of it is everyone that works from the Z direction backwards has contributed something in some way to society over time. They've contributed understanding in multiple different fields. But anyone that is trying to move from A backwards forward towards creating causal links, there has never been any real success in that, because we can't even get a B defined. And until we understand this, you can argue evolution with these people. You can argue all of these different things that you want to. You will never get any traction. There is a fundamentally different approach in how they're answering the problem. They're starting from the A position, and they think that that could be fruitful in understanding, because you can't know that A is not true. So what happens is they're encompassing A and all of the gap in between of what we don't know, and they say, well, you can't know that A isn't, or you can't know what A is, because you can't know all of the gap in between. This is true. We cannot know all of the gap in between, but it is still methodologically incorrect to start at A. It is simply incorrect. You can't gain anything from starting at A. You still have to start backwards through the procedural understanding. And is it possible that means you will never get to A? Unfortunately, that's just the breaks. It is possible that we may never get to A. It is okay to say that at this present moment, a given subject, we don't know. We don't understand. So when we look at subjects like abiogenesis, and we look at questions like, well, where did life come from? You don't know, or you can't explain. Okay. That doesn't take away from the methodology. That doesn't mean that you get to start at A as a proposition and imbue it with infinite and all-powerful narrative just so it'll plug in with anything that we, through the progress of understanding backwards through Z, wind up concluding. So it's just a wrong approach. And I think it's time that starts getting addressed, because addressing all of the other subjects and all of the other arguments, you're not getting any ground. You can be the most intelligent individual that there is about evolution, about biology. You're not going to get any traction, because the supposition that is in place means that they have to start with this presupposing that A is, and then anything that is lining up with it has to line up with A. So they're starting with the target in advance, whereas from the Z position, there is no target that's known. We're trying to understand things that is this stage, what we have, and then we're trying to go backwards, and it's true that there is an end to how much we can understand. But these are you're approaching from two completely, fundamentally different angles, and I would argue that one, from the A side, it's not doing anything for anybody. It's not gaining any progress. This is why I think the Z direction is the only way to go. And if you want to pose hypotheticals like an A, you could pose all the hypotheticals that you want, but we shouldn't start with that narrative and run with it. We should start with Z and have to gain information backwards. I'm sorry, it's just how we understand the state of where we presently are, how those things happened. Because when I'm asked a question like, where did you come from? I came from my mother. Then my mother may have come from somewhere else, and these things are causally. They're a chain that goes backwards, and we have to accept that, and that you can't, yes, you may not be able to go back past a certain position, but that's irrelevant. The method is still correct. The method is correct, but starting with an A proposition that you can't connect to a B, and then say, well, you don't know what's in between, so therefore A is plausible. It's just not valid. It's not a valid approach, and we need to address the incorrect procedural approach with this theist explanation first before we start having conversations about evolution or any other subject.